It is 5:36. We'll call the meeting to order. Clint, would you do invocation for us, please?
Let's pray. Lord, we come to you thanking you for this opportunity to come together to improve our community. Please bless our citizens and city leadership and give us this community guidance and understanding in all matters discussed. In your name, amen.
Amen. Shane, would you lead us in flag salute?
Would you please stand for the pledge?
Roll call, please.
Here.
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 Here. Moving to the first order of business, consent items. Consider approval of regular minutes of April 4th, 2023.
I make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsome.
Yes.
Whitney Kerr.
Yes.
Clint Horner.
Yes.
Shane Knight.
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Thank you. Moving to administration, I move that we move the administration for A to be heard after the public hearing. If I could get a second.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsome.
Yes.
Whitney Kerr.
Yes.
Clint Horner.
Yes.
Shane Knight.
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Moving to the public hearings portion, 5A, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2023-10, a plan unit development request for property located at University Boulevard and Criswell Boulevard. Ms. O'Neill.
Good evening. This is for a plan unit development. The reason behind the plan unit development is primarily because of the multiple buildings per lot requirement of the ordinance having one building per lot. The zoning is C2 zoning. The total lot is about 4.6 acres. The notifications have been sent out. Staff has not received any phone calls or letters regarding this request. We did have one question pertaining to the stormwater runoff, and that will be addressed here in just a little bit. The PUD itself, they're combining 3 lots. That's going to make the 4.6 acres. That's what the PUD plat's also doing at the same time as creating the PUD. The staff members have signed off supporting this and does not have any notes other than that the water would have to come across University, so they're going to have to work on that timing with the construction that's ongoing with University. And then our fire marshal just stated that the further site plan that will come after should the PUD be approved will have to come into requirements of the 2018 IFC Appendix B. And so that's going to be something that will come after the PUD. That's going to be regarding the location and distance to nearest fire hydrants. So that'll be something that'll be addressed at a later time. There's city water and sewer nearby, obviously. Another thing, if they disturb greater than an acre, they will need a stormwater permit from the state of Oklahoma should they disturb greater than an acre. The land use, future land use map does have this area as commercial land uses, so the PUD is in line with the future land use map. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Regarding the question that the resident had was about the stormwater runoff. They do show a detention or retention pond on the north side of the property. The resident actually lives on the north side of the property, so he's concerned about that. I explained to him that that runoff is going to be looked at, that detention pond and retention pond will be looked at whenever we do the site plan further down the road by the engineer, Brendan Wall. So that will be done at a future time, but it does show already that there will be stormwater runoff, and there is an ordinance saying that you cannot create more runoff than what is already currently there. So there isn't really a huge concern that he's going to have more runoff than what he currently has. So did want that stated that way. That was should there be further questions about that. Be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is also here if you have any questions of them.
Thank you, appreciate it. Do we
I
have
want
any?
to say something real quick. I'm involved in this project as the architect, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know Danny Curry, the civil engineer, is here as well if you have any questions for civil side, but I'm going to refrain from or abstain from voting, but I'm happy to fill you in on any questions you might have.
Thank you, appreciate it. Is any questions for Ms. O'Neill?
This is all retail, no residential.
That's correct. The uses is going to be retail, commercial, yes, and restaurant, I believe.
So the plan shows 26 different retail, I guess, potential locations. Is it a possibility that some of those could be consolidated to be larger spaces for retail? So there, I mean, 26 would be the maximum number, I'm assuming, but it could be lower than that if somebody comes in and wants 2,800 square feet instead of 1,300 square feet.
That's possible. I mean, that's going to be more on the building side. Once they get down to the building construction side, they'll look at more of how that's going to be handled per building and whether or not that's going to be handled on that. And then on the lot side of it, it did show. I don't remember if it shows them as. I have to go back and look at it real quick. If it shows them as individual lots, or if it actually showed them. No, actually, it's one lot. I'm sorry. Then so if it's so with the square footage of the individual, like the little strip centers there, that could potentially change.
Okay.
But the overall, my understanding would be pretty well set at this point, should this be approved.
And
If you'd let me interrupt just one
Sure.
second. If we could put the monitor on page 27 so that the audience can follow the discussion. Thank you.
And I apologize if you already said this, and I was trying to get the file open, but so it meets parking requirements.
Yes, the
Okay.
building inspector and all that looked at all that, and that'll also be further looked at the site plan level too, again, just to confirm.
And then any study or information about impact on traffic on University entering and exiting the property?
The street department looked at it and our fire marshal looked at it as far as from the safety side. There was no comments made. I'll leave the civil engineer if they have any comments about it. No comments was made on the staff side regarding that piece of it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I can say that the building sizes themselves are pretty well set in terms that they can't get any bigger, because we couldn't fit any more parking if they were to get bigger. And yes, those individual lease spaces that are in the strip buildings can be combined. You know, if someone wanted 4 of those, they would be able to do that.
On the screen, if you're able to zoom in where folks can see the buildings themselves.
So Shane, I
That
guess
could be helpful.
this is a question you or the developer could answer. I mean, my first thought was just it's got one entrance and exit to University for 27 different retail potentially establishments, and so was there not an ability to maybe put an additional exit and entranceway to University, or is that not?
Not at this time, there's not.
Yeah.
There was some discussion later down the road potentially, but not for this particular PUD. And that'll be handled at a later time should that be developed later. But for the city ordinance side and what the city requirements are,
They're
it
meeting
meets
that?
all the
Okay.
requirements, yes.
So my understanding is everything meets requirements. We're just looking at this because requires multiple buildings. Is
That's
that
correct. Yep.
Those are, to answer a little bit of your question about the entrances, that's an entrance and exit in each of those lanes. It's not just an entrance one side and exit the other.
Shane, this might be for you or maybe for Mr. Corey. That is in that very sort of narrow portion of University Boulevard that is only 2 lanes wide without a turn lane. If this were to be developed as drawn, would there be room for a turn lane to be put on University Boulevard there without materially changing the design here? I mean, that University Boulevard has a turn lane, and then for a very narrow section squeezes down to 2 lanes. This is in that 2-lane area.
That is definitely a question for Danny. He can tell you. I think we're set back off of the right of ways, so that if that were to happen, there should be room there. But
Yes, so the only problem with this is the new improvements they're doing right now, because they have new storm drains, new manholes. So all that gonna have to come out and get moved back. That's the only problem I see, just from a construction point of view. But for the room, we do have the room for it, so. We need to take that ditch out and make everything underground, which I believe that's what they're doing right now. We
Right.
just need to slide it back. For the sewer manholes, we can just adjust those to grade. It's not a big deal. They can still stay under street. The only thing, probably the storm.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Curry, if you don't mind, I'm not sure I understood the answer. So after things are moved in the process that's underway currently, there will be room for a turn lane or not?
Well, just let me get the plans. Yes, okay. So you can see it right there. You see how much room we have between the back of curb and the property line. I don't have the measurement with me, but it looked like more than 10 feet.
the property line is the dark
Is
blue
is
line.
the dark blue one.
So it looks like there's 40 feet from the center of the
Correct.
road.
Correct. So there would be enough space, but you have to design the road way back there, you know, like come and make it wider all the way to here. So not just his property involved, there's multiple properties. But that would be nice to have for sure.
Did you have something that I know we kind of got out of order. Is there anything that you wanted to speak on?
No, the comment about the entrance and exit, we do have actually 2 entrances and exit. Shane made it clear. We are meeting all the requirements. We're gonna have fence between all the residential area and the commercial. The drainage it kind of split in the middle. Half of it drain to university and the other half north. We're gonna have detention pond to count for that extra flow we're creating. Paving will meet the city requirement. Parking count will meet, I think, 150 square feet for each parking. That's it.
I would assume water naturally flows to the east, and I know as that development was underway, I don't know how much of the study, water study was done. So I guess just as a comment,
Yeah.
I certainly would encourage extra effort and diligence in managing
Yes.
runoff.
Yes, so I did the best I can. Right now it's basically flowing toward the parking lot of the, what you call it, I forgot the name of the dealership, the car dealership, yes, yeah, Freedom. So it's all basically flowing to his parking lot, and then there is a pond to the east of his parking lot where all the water go. Behind
And
IHOP.
it's primarily silted in at this point too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's not been, maintained, and so, that street has had some issues.
Yes.
And so, again,
Yes.
just as a special request, if you will,
Yes.
extra diligence on making sure that we can retain what's needed.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
certainly don't want
no,
to add to the problem.
Yeah, for the detention pond, we have enough volume. I was just concerned about the water leaving the property, but we did a special kind of outlet where the pipe actually go into an open structure, and to slow the water down, and then the water will just kind of build up in the structure and flow slowly on all the sides of the structure. And I added riprap around it all the way. So I did the best I can to slow the water as much as I can. So hopefully we won't have problem.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for applicant?
Thank you.
Mr. Markham, I do have a question for you, if you don't mind. I share your concern or question about the availability to add a center turn lane. From a committee or commission standpoint, what's our ability to require them to create additional room in this plan?
I don't know that you really have that. I don't know what authority that would be at this point, because we don't have a provision in our code which has been discussed for, require impact fees, or, something like that. Improvements to public property. You could, you can require things within the PUD itself, but I'm not sure that this body has the authority to require, recommend improvements to public property under our current scheme.
I guess my question is not about making a recommendation on adding a center turn lane, but in the PUD, do we have the ability to require that additional space be allocated?
Oh,
for
I
that?
think you probably could do that, as long as that, right now, as long as the property line is where it is, that's still within the right-of-way. If that's still within the right-of-way of the city, the city can build a road there if they want to. So I think there could be in the future, if there was maybe a different circumstance where the property line went right up to the roadway, you could, maybe as a condition, have them grant easement to the city or something like that for those improvements. I don't know that's necessary here. The city seems like they could do those improvements if they needed to, as the property lies.
Shane, you may be able to answer, or Danny, either one. If that expansion to the road was made, does that put the utilities under the road, or is there still room for easement alongside the road?
Sorry, I'm actually looking at the plans for University Boulevard improvement. The utilities are underneath the sidewalks. So the new utilities are on the north side of University. They're not under the road.
So if the road was widened at that point, they would be?
Yeah, that's potentially, yes. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with the dimensions on all of that, and I'm just looking at the plans.
Mr. Markham, are you able to advise on how we address that issue?
I don't know that you can.
Okay.
My question was just if there was room to do it, if it became necessary. It appears as if there is, but it's probably going to be a big undertaking on behalf of the city to do it. I don't know that the property owner or the applicant would be responsible for it at this point, not under our current scheme. I think there's a possibility that some changes could be made to require developers to, incur those, those impact fees or those responsibilities, but I'm not sure we have that authority at this point.
Thanks, appreciate it. Whitney, just as a point of discussion, does it even make sense to put in whatever our motion is for that to be a consideration?
Not really. We don't, since that's not something within our purview and that's not under our framework, I think general discussion about it's fine, but I don't think it has a proper place in the motion.
Okay, thanks. Any other discussion? Is there a motion? Oh, yeah, we did skip a part. Is there anyone who'd like to speak for or against? Thank you. Was there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve PC 2023-10, a planned unit development request for property located near University Boulevard and Criswell Boulevard.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsome,
Yes.
Whitney Kerr,
Yes.
Clint Horner,
Yes.
Shane Knight,
Abstain.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Motion passes. We'll move back to 4A under administration, discussion, consideration, and possible action on amendment to section 156.137 of the Durant Code of Ordinance. Ms. O'Neill?
Yes, so since last month, we had the ordinance about the multiple buildings on one lot. And so we went ahead and did a little more digging. And there was a lot of different variety ways of how cities kind of handled that. One of the ways was handling it as well, a lot of cities actually didn't have it, especially in their commercial, whether or not they did have multiple buildings on one lot or not. So you'd have to make an assumption. Or the other way was handling it with a lot percent coverage or building coverage or the ones that did have the principal structure per lot. The others, they didn't have, they just had the one principal building and that was it. So, based on the last conversation, there's some thought given as far as kind of how you all was concerned with having a lot of commercial buildings on a particular lot. I did want to bring up that there is a landscaping requirement for all buildings that is required. So that landscaping, which would also include of how much building coverage you can have. Landscaping requirement is at least 5% of the gross area of the lot. Now that is only for the area that is in the street, that faces a street or is in the public right of way. And that's for all commercially and residential zones. So it does not include industrial or any other zoning. It's just commercial and residentially zoned properties. One of the other thoughts that I had was if we wanted to go towards a lot coverage percentage, a lot of the cities that I looked at, their percentages across the board were significantly lower than ours. So if we wanted to go that route, then the recommendation would be to keep it similar to what we already have within our current ordinances. This is more of a Band-Aid to use until we get the full rewrite of our land use ordinances. Just with the amount of PUDs that we are getting, we're just hoping to kind of make it a little bit easier for everybody involved. But if it's completely up to what you guys want and what council decides on what of the direction moving forward. But I wanted to at least provide you the information.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the landscaping. That applies to CBD as well?
That it says just commercially and residentially zoned property. So with the way the ordinance is written, Tom, would you agree that CBD is considered commercial zoned property?
Yes.
So, but the problem with CBD is most of that is downtown and zero lot line at this point.
Can we make a note on that to visit with the consultant as well?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I did a fair amount of digging on this also, just not to double your efforts, but to just fill Drew and Whitney in on what I found as well. So I looked and talked to on various ones, but McAllister, Ardmore, Norman, Ada,
Mhm.
Edmond, just to try and get a spectrum of cities that are way ahead of us
Mhm.
on ordinances and some that are maybe a little larger
Mm.
than us.
Mhm.
And found a lot of the same things. I think McAllister was really the only one I found that still had a single building per lot. Anything else had to have special permission to
Mm.
some level. Ardmore had something called building groups, which was different than their PUDs.
Mhm.
So the building group process was still a process that had to go through a review by their, by whatever they call their planning commission, but, so it still had to go through a review process. And then, like our bigger cities, Norman, Ada, Edmond, those all were percentage coverage. So multiple buildings on outside of the residential, but commercial, industrial, that sort of thing. They have a lot more districts than we do, obviously.
Right, yep.
But all of those were based off of a percentage of coverage, which I'm in favor of a percentage of coverage versus number of buildings. I do think our current percentages are high. So I know that this is just a Band-Aid.
Right.
So in thinking about our consultant that's working on these updates, it'd be nice to have that as a check mark of we
Yeah,
need to
she,
look at
that's
our
one thing
percentages.
she's very well
Yeah.
aware of and looking at, yeah.
And then the other thing I thought was who, this sort of took me back to what we talked about a couple of months ago where, we said that you couldn't have a bar downtown unless a certain percentage of it was food sales. Well, like who's calculating the percentages?
Right.
So I think the same thing on the site plans,
Mhm.
that I'm wondering if we can instill a requirement in our permitting process where you have to show those calculations, like this is our percentage of lot coverage, this is our percentage of landscaping, and here's how we're meeting those. So that it's not on you to get in there with a ruler and figure out what those percentages are, that's part of the submittal process for the permit.
And a lot of the bigger projects do already do that.
Sure,
Some
sure.
of the smaller ones do not, but those are relatively easy to
Yeah.
figure out. and
Yeah,
you can-
we didn't
Right.
show that it was a requirement to be submitted,
Yes,
we just
exactly.
showed that it's a requirement.
Right, and there's some that does say it's supposed to be submitted as well.
Yeah.
So, and usually on the permit side, the building inspector handles all of the permitting. So I would assume that he is looking at that and taking that, looking at all that as well. So, the percentages and all that. So I would assume that
Yeah.
that is happening currently.
I would assume as well. I just think it'd be nice if we made the
Yes.
applicant or the
Yes.
developer
Yeah,
put
actually
down
show
on-
it
put
on
it
the,
down on paper
make it a
as
little easier
here's-
for us. Yeah,
Well,
no, I
yeah,
agree.
I mean, really, so that the onus is on them
Yeah.
to show here's how we're meeting your requirements.
Yeah.
But you're really talking about a check mark that requirement has been met before the permit is issued, right?
Yeah, there you go, yeah. Yeah, I guess a check mark, whether that's your staff that reviews it and checks that box, or whether you require it as a part of the permit submittal.
And just so you guys know, on the back end, staff has been working on a site plan review process. So that's something that's been being worked on, so that's coming eventually.
Yeah. I did notice that in a lot of the other ordinances too, for some of the larger municipalities, that they have a completely separate review process for
Yes.
site plans
Yes.
versus building
Yep.
plans.
Yep.
So,
So that's something that we've worked on because we realize it's a need.
yeah.
We just,
I'm personally in favor, just for you guys, I'm personally in favor of a percentage of lot coverage. But I do think we need to make those notes for our upcoming ordinance update, that
Yep.
we need to look at those percentages and
Whitney, did you have any comments, questions? I'll say I'm of the same opinion that moving to a coverage percentage makes a little more sense, makes things a little cleaner. I think the only idea that I had, and this may be more cumbersome than what it's worth, but just for discussion's sake, another option could be, ordinance provides approval up to a certain percentage, and beyond that, it's triggered for review. If there was some concern that we wouldn't catch, some of the ones that we talked about even last month that are maybe crazy or outlandish, so if that's a concern, maybe that's an option. Again, I don't know that I'm necessarily a proponent of that, or making that recommendation is just idea sharing, I guess. May not be needed.
And on the percentage of building coverage, the only zoning districts that do not have that currently is the central business district, which we talked about, which a lot of that already has, like the 0 lot lines, the buildings that are right next to each other. So that's one that would be a little difficult to actually impose upon currently. But the C3 district does not have any, and that is it, and the H1. That's the only two that do not have that percentage currently. All the rest of them do. And then I'd have a question for Tom too.
Just out of curiosity, is there any thought about whether 70% for C2 is appropriate based on y'all's research?
Honestly, a lot of the percentages that I saw all of them were significantly lower on the commercial side of it than ours were, as in 50% and lower on most of the cities that I saw. So, I mean, if we wanted to also look at the percentages, and that would be something that we could look at and bring back. And that was my question for Tom is, if we wanted to go the percentage route, if we wanted to update the ordinance, and if we need to bring the table back with the percentages, since that wasn't on the agenda. Is that okay. That's what I figured, but I wanted to make sure, so.
So just to clarify, we're not able to make a recommendation for percentages today?
On the percentages, they couldn't make a recommendation on the percentages, right? They could only just say we need to look at them, or legally.
Does that have to be tabled and brought back, or are we able to make a recommendation to move forward with council?
Make a recommendation.
Okay, because it's under 2 different ordinance numbers. Because it's the building one is the one that was on the actual agenda, but then yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because then the table is a completely separate number. Because we could look at, and if they were in agreement with this, then we could do that. They could figure out what they wanted to do with this piece of it, maybe, and then we could do the percentages, or however they wanted to move forward. But if we needed to do the percentages separately, then I guess that's the question.
I get what you're saying. So the table is presented in 157.032.
Correct.
This is, what was it?
156.137. Yeah.
137.
Two different ordinance numbers, and one was on the agenda and one was not.
Here's the question: Does something that goes on the council's agenda regarding these zoning ordinances required to come through this commission first?
If it's within the land use code, yes.
Okay. I like the idea of lowering the percentages for this Band-Aid process, because what I have found too is that in these larger cities where they have a little bigger footprint than we do, sort of their older downtown historic envelope, if you will, typically has a much less percentage.
Mhm.
And then as you go out into some more of those suburban areas, those percentages increase.
Yep.
So I think that for Durant, it's not such a big footprint. Until we get more districts classified in this future update, lowering those percentages is probably a good move, so that we don't have someone trying to fill up a lot, downtown somewhere or along Main Street.
And applicants can still use the PUD process.
Yeah,
If there's
if
a
there's something
development.
they wanted to do outside of that, they could
So-
always go for a PUD or a variance of some sort. Yeah.
Whitney, I'm looking at you. Do you have anything?
No, I mean, this isn't really, to be quite honest, Shane knows way more about this than I do. I understand the basics, but I don't have any particular thought process about what percentage is appropriate or what's not. I mean, that's somewhat outside of my scope of anything that I do, so.
How about the approach that we're discussing? That's,
I think the approach works. I mean, that is the one thing is that, you know, I'm looking at it from practically how will this work in action, and I think this is a workable plan, at least in the short term, while we're trying to figure out the longer term.
yep. I agree. So do we want to table and present these together?
That's up to you all.
I think that would maybe be easier to follow. So have
Well,
the-
or you
have
could,
them-
you could I mean, there's a possibility of approving this 156, 137, based on percentage of lot coverage as shown in table 157 something. But then next month, we'd have to see table 157 to make those adjustments.
To me, I think they
Or
go
would it be
together,
cleaner
though.
to just do it all together?
It's up to you guys ultimately, but currently with there already being those percentages there, except for those couple of, and I'll be honest, we haven't had a project yet that came in that just said, okay, we're gonna fit everything in there, because of building and fire code is the two big things that honestly keep, and setbacks, that keep a lot from getting so compact. So, you know, it's, in my mind, it's not a huge concern, but I completely understand where y'all are coming from for sure. So, if you guys want to do where as far as the approving the ordinance the way it's written or making alterations to it, then that's something that can be done, and then we can bring the table back another time to look at all the percentages, or
Is anyone aware
if you wanted it
of-
together, then
Is anyone aware of the approval of this being a pressing issue, or can we bring it back as a clean that references the table?
the projects have kind of slowed down presently as far as
Okay.
on our side, but we always have people calling every day about what the process is and what's needed. So, you know,
My personal preference would be to bring them together and have this one reference the table. That way it's a clean presentation
okay.
and folks can follow it.
I agree. I like that.
You good with that?
And if you do table it, we just need to a date certain. And as a reminder, we do have 2 meetings in June. So, if you say June, you have to determine which meeting in June.
So currently
Yes.
we have
'Cause of July
nothing on
4th.
the agenda for the first June meeting, so we want to state the second June. Does that
It's up to you all.
suit everybody?
Say that again? Sorry.
As it stands, we don't have any items for the first June meeting.
Mm.
So if we schedule this for the first June meeting, this will be the only reason we meet.
Do we have anything scheduled at this point for the second meeting?
But July's meeting happens in June.
We
right?
have
Yeah.
an item that has been submitted, but there's been an issue that came up today, which is why it most likely will not be on that first meeting in June. That's why we're hoping we can get it fixed prior to the second meeting in June. But again, it just depends upon if that gets fixed.
My only level of concern was I'm with Drew. If we can do everything in one meeting instead of 2 meetings, I'm
Right.
all about that.
Yeah,
So-
exactly, yeah. Right now, we do not have anything that is actually on the first meeting in June.
Do you
That's
have
correct.
that date?
I can find it.
I could- Thank you.
June 27th. Thank you, Carrie. She keeps me straight.
All of us.
So I'll make a motion to table this item to the June 27th meeting with the recommendation that we reword this 156.137 to reference percentage of lot coverage for multiple buildings. And the change in the table 157, whatever the table is in chapter 157,
Okay.
I believe it's, yeah, 157,
establishing what those percentages would be.
032, I think is what it is.
I'll second.
Thank you. Have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Whitney Kerr,
Aye.
Shane Knight,
Aye.
Drew Jackson.
Aye. Is there any new business? We have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.